Millionaire invited his ex to show off. She exposed his hidden family instead. Welcome, everyone. Today, we have a riveting tale that delves into the glittering world of a self-made millionaire who seemed to have it all until the day his carefully curated facade began to unravel. In this story, we'll follow a man driven by ambition, a woman with a forgotten past, and the explosive secrets that come to light when pride overshadows truth. Brace yourself for hidden relationships, shocking betrayals, and a taste of karma that strikes when least expected. Sit back and prepare to be swept into a drama filled with heartbreak, redemption, and revelations that prove no amount of money can bury the past forever. Before we dive in, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. If you're excited about this story, let us know. If you enjoyed the video, press 1. If not, press O. Your feedback really inspires me to gather more uplifting and meaningful stories. Darren Stokes liked to say he was born a dreamer. Growing up in a small coastal town in South Carolina, he spent his childhood gazing at yachts docked by marinas he could never afford to enter. His father worked long hours as a fisherman. His mother stitched clothes for a local boutique. Dinner table conversations often revolved around stretch finances and second-hand bargains. Darren watched his parents toil without complaint. Yet he wanted more. The lush life, the freedom to travel, the glamorous parties he'd only ever seen on TV. Dreams turned to ambition, and eventually, ambition drove him far from home. By his mid-20s, Darren had an MBA and a risky startup plan. He assembled a small team of programmers and marketers and hunkered down in a friend's empty garage. Over countless energy drinks, late-night coding marathons, and near bankruptcy, they developed an app that connected job seekers with emerging companies. For a year, the project teetered on the brink of collapse until, in a twist of fate, a well-known angel investor discovered them at a local tech event. The subsequent injection of capital launched them into a new stratosphere of growth. Within 5 years, Darren sold his stake for millions. Once wealth coursed through his veins, Darren indulged in every luxury he had once only imagined. Expensive sports cars lined his driveway. Private flights replaced cramped economy seats. Designer suits and exclusive memberships became his new uniform. He quickly bought a penthouse in Miami, overlooking the azure waters that reminded him of a childhood spent gazing at boats he never set foot on. Invitations to high society galas and black tie events poured in, each one showcasing an extravagant world of power and prestige. Darren found himself mesmerized by celebrities and business moguls who now treated him as an equal. He was unstoppable. Then there was Heather Greenwood, a name that carried him back to simpler days. He met Heather in college before his star had started to rise. She was humble, sharp-witted, and never wowed by superficial status. Heather's ambition lay in journalism, and she spent late nights editing the college newspaper, determined to expose truths that others preferred hidden. Darren and Heather's bond was forged through shared stories, mutual support, and a promise to chase their dreams wholeheartedly. They even toyed with an engagement after graduation. But as Darren's business took off, he immersed himself in the hustle, leaving Heather to fade into the background. Over time, they drifted apart. Darren rarely answered Heather's calls, always claiming deadlines or investor meetings. Heather, busy pursuing her own career, tried to be patient, but the distance grew. Eventually, a terse text sent by Darren at some ungodly hour announced his desire to break things off. Heather remembered the pang of betrayal. After years together, everything ended with a few cryptic lines on a tiny screen. She had refused to beg for clarity. Instead, she buried her heartbreak in her work, all while Darren soared to new heights of financial success. The years passed, and their paths never crossed again. Darren's life after that break was anything but lonely. He courted rising actresses and traveled with Instagram-famous models. His conquests appeared in tabloids, arm in arm with the tech entrepreneur who had come from nowhere. Yet deep inside, Darren was never quite satisfied. Money had erased his struggles, but it had also stripped him of the grounded warmth he once knew. Occasionally, he'd glance at old photos, shots of him, and Heather on a worn-out sofa, him in a wrinkled T-shirt, her laughing with a battered notebook on her lap. That memory pricked at him, a subtle pang he couldn't entirely ignore. Entering his early 30s, Darren found a new venture, extravagant networking events for the wealthy. High-profile celebrities, politicians, and fellow millionaires flocked to these gatherings, often held at iconic locales like the Ritz-Carlton in New York or lavish private islands. Darren set the tone for all things prestigious. He thrived on orchestrating the grandest spectacles, ensuring each event outdid the last. One day, while preparing a particularly exclusive affair, a yacht party in the French Riviera, Darren found himself reminiscing about his origins. His ex, Heather Greenwood, crossed his mind. Where was she now? Did she ever think about him? An impulsive idea formed. What if he invited Heather to witness the life he'd built, to show her how far he'd come? A petty stroke of pride told him it was time to prove he had won at life. Heather, the woman who once believed in honesty and authenticity, might marvel at his success. And perhaps, just perhaps, her admiration would be the final piece of closure he needed. He dialed an old number he still had saved, expecting a dead line. But someone picked up. It was Heather, polite and professional. Darren felt an unexpected flutter. He asked if she might like to reconnect. No pressure. At his upcoming gala. To his surprise, she agreed. Heather was hardly the same person Darren remembered. After the breakup, she'd turned her heartbreak into fuel for her journalism career. She had reported from war-torn regions, interviewed political figures, and uncovered corporate scandals. Now an acclaimed investigative reporter, her work had earned her multiple awards for exposing corruption within Fortune 500 companies. When Darren's invitation arrived, she recognized his name instantly. Part of her was curious. Perhaps she wanted to see what kind of man he had become. Another part, though, wondered if he was still as self-centered as ever. Steeling herself, she accepted. If nothing else, she told herself, it might be good for a conversation, maybe even fodder for a story someday. The evening of the gala arrived, held at an exclusive estate perched on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic. Valets maneuvered luxury cars into a neatly organized display. Women draped in couture gowns mingled with entrepreneurs who flaunted flamboyant suits. Champagne flowed freely, and a live string quartet played soft melodies under artfully arranged lights. Darren, dressed in a custom-tailored tuxedo, beamed as he greeted guests. He scanned the entrance repeatedly, checking for Heather's arrival. With each passing minute, he felt an unexpected swirl of nerves until, finally, there she was, stepping out of a modest sedan, wearing a simple black dress that accentuated her poise without screaming for attention. Darren felt a wave of nostalgia the moment he saw her. Heather's eyes, always sharp, now carried a calm confidence. He approached with a practiced air of refined hospitality, though internally he quivered at the memories. She offered a polite smile. "Long time, Darren." "Indeed," he replied, guiding her toward the garden area where cocktails were being served. "I'm glad you could make it. I wanted you to see what I've accomplished." He gestured at the opulent champagne towers, hand-carved ice sculptures, and an orchestra. Heather raised an eyebrow but said nothing. The party glowed with splendor, yet she sensed an undercurrent of emptiness. For a moment, Darren tried to impress Heather with the scope of his achievements, philanthropic collaborations, international ventures, a rumored seat on a major corporation's board. She listened politely. Yet Heather also observed the guests, some of whom seemed uneasy when Darren strode by. She noticed how Darren's circle parted for him, as if unsure whether he truly commanded their respect or merely demanded it. The atmosphere was charged with superficial smiles and carefully cultivated images. Heather recalled the driven young man she once knew. Somehow, this polished version of Darren seemed more fragile, as though any challenge might crack the veneer. While Darren busied himself flaunting his successes, an inconspicuous figure lingered at the periphery. A woman in her late 20s, wearing a modest cocktail dress, hovered near the buffet table. She was quiet, her gaze darting anxiously around the venue. Whenever Darren passed, she shrank a little. Heather's journalistic instincts fired. Who was this woman, and why did she look at Darren with a mixture of longing and trepidation? Something about her presence gave Heather a tingling sense that a story lay hidden in plain sight. She watched as the woman occasionally pulled out her phone, tapping frantically before stowing it away. The gala continued with speeches from business partners praising Darren's unstoppable drive. Fireworks were scheduled for midnight, and Darren reveled in the attention. Between conversations, Heather saw that same anxious guest slip through a side door leading to the estate's interior. Sensing a mystery, Heather quietly followed, heart thrumming with anticipation. She tiptoed down a corridor lined with Renaissance paintings, the distant hum of music fading behind her. Finally, she found the woman in a small lounge, pacing in agitation, tears threatening to spill over. "Are you okay?" Heather asked gently, stepping forward. The woman startled, nearly dropping her phone. "I'm fine," the stranger replied, clearly anything but. Heather introduced herself, and the woman offered her name, Maria. She admitted she'd come at Darren's invitation, though she didn't say why. Heather probed gently, explaining she was an old friend of Darren's. After a moment of hesitation, Maria blurted, "He wants to keep us hidden." Her lip trembled. "But I'm tired of it." Heather's eyes widened. "What do you mean, us?" With a shaky breath, Maria revealed she'd been seeing Darren off and on for years, an arrangement that began after one of his high-profile relationships ended. Now they shared a child, a 6-year-old girl named Rosie. Heather listened, stunned by the confession. Darren Stokes, a father, and he'd invited Maria to the gala but refused to acknowledge her publicly. Maria's anguish spilled out in quick, hushed words. She worked as a small-time event organizer. Darren had supported her financially but refused to make their relationship known. They only ever met in discreet locations, overshadowed by the facade of Darren's single, glamorous existence. Maria had arrived tonight believing he might finally introduce her as more than a secret, yet he'd told her to lay low, as not to distract from his main event. The heartbreak in her eyes was unmistakable. Heather's blood simmered with empathy and outrage. She recalled how Darren had once dismissed her with a cold text. Now, here he was, repeating a similar pattern of detachment, with a child caught in the middle. Worse yet, he had apparently enticed Maria to the party as a silent trophy, a hidden family he refused to fully claim. Something about that brazen cruelty spurred Heather into action. She comforted Maria, gently inquiring whether she had the support she needed. Maria shook her head. Her own parents lived out of state. She'd never told them about Darren, fearful he'd withdraw what little support he provided. Heather's journalistic instincts flared to life. Truth had a way of surfacing, especially in her line of work. Taking a deep breath, she assured Maria she wasn't alone. Then Heather discreetly slipped away, her mind racing with possibilities. Darren's gala was packed with powerful socialites, people who could make or break his image in an instant. If he was parading his success for the world, a revelation of a concealed family would be catastrophic. Heather felt torn. Part of her believed a conversation with Darren might suffice. But a deeper part recalled how easily he dismissed those he deemed unworthy of his grand design. The party reached its apex when fireworks illuminated the sky. Vibrant bursts of color arced over the estate, mirrored by the dark ocean below. Guests gathered on the lawn, gasping with delight. Darren glided from group to group, shaking hands, accepting praise. Heather found him near the main fountain, boasting to a cluster of admirers about a forthcoming business deal. She approached, her expression calm, though her heart pounded. "Darren, do you have a moment?" she asked. "For you, of course," he said, guiding her aside. "How are you finding my celebration?" She cast a glance at the fireworks overhead. "Dazzling," she replied, her tone measured. "Quite a spectacle." Then Heather cut to the chase. She mentioned Maria's name. Darren's polished smile faltered for a split second, but he recovered swiftly, feigning ignorance. Heather pressed, recounting her encounter with Maria, the tears, the confessions, the child. Darren's face grew taut. "Listen, you don't understand," he hissed, lowering his voice as a wave of laughter from the crowd masked his anger. "I help Maria financially. It's complicated. We have an arrangement. If she told you otherwise, she's exaggerating." Heather's mouth fell open. "She says you have a daughter." Darren waved a dismissive hand. "That's not relevant. I'm not obligated to parade my entire personal life." Something in his callous tone made Heather's stomach churn. An unstoppable wave of frustration surged in Heather. Gone was the earnest college boy with big dreams. Before her stood a man for whom success had become a shield against accountability. "You invited me here to show off, didn't you?" she said in a steely whisper. Darren's eyes flickered with annoyance. "I wanted you to see I've done well," he admitted, "and maybe put some old regrets to rest." Heather gritted her teeth. "You talk about regrets and achievements, yet you're denying your own child. You realize how sick that is?" Darren's nostrils flared. "Don't judge me," he warned, glancing around to ensure no one was eavesdropping. "This is my life." Meanwhile, Maria lingered near the edge of the crowd. Spotting Darren and Heather locked in a tense exchange, she mustered the courage to approach. When she reached them, Darren tried to walk away, but Heather stepped in front of him. Guests nearby sensed the sudden drama, heads turning. Maria's voice quaked. "Why did you invite me, Darren? You said it would be a turning point." Darren's eyes darted around, panic creeping into his polished composure. "Maria, not now," he whispered harshly. But she continued, tears glistening. "I've covered for you all this time. I've kept Rosie a secret at your request. I thought tonight would be different." The fireworks finale burst overhead, painting the estate in flickering light. Guests pressed closer, enthralled by the unexpected confrontation. A hush spread as the tension became palpable. Darren tried to usher Maria away, but she stood firm. Heather, seeing the wave of fascination rolling through the onlookers, stepped up and spoke clearly. "Darren, are you going to deny your daughter in front of all these people? Or will you finally acknowledge her?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Whispers of child and hidden family cascaded among them. Darren stiffened, rage flashing in his eyes. He had orchestrated this party to flaunt his power. Now it was transforming into his worst nightmare. Looking helplessly from one face to another, Darren realized there was no escape. Too many phones were already out, recording. His image, his brand was at stake. A moment's hesitation might cost him everything. Adrenaline coursed through him and he blurted, "Yes, Maria and I share a child. It's private. I never wanted it to become a public spectacle." He tried to spin the confession, painting himself as a well-intentioned father guarding his child's privacy. But Maria trembled with indignation. "Is that why you told me never to appear at your events?" she countered. "To protect Rosie? Or to protect your reputation?" A few guests gasped, their gazes locking onto Darren. He opened his mouth, but no words came. In the hush, The final firework fizzled away, leaving the night sky empty of color. The hush turned oppressive. Heather felt a pang of sympathy for Maria, who had carried Darren's secret for so long. She glanced at Darren, who was visibly cornered, like a predator outsmarted by its own prey. Then, a voice cut through the silence. Darren's longtime business associate, Wade Roberts, stepped forward. "Darren, you assured me you were single and free from complications. We're finalizing a family-friendly brand campaign next week. Now, I learned there's a hidden child involved." The disapproval was evident in Wade's tone. Immediate karma seemed to be descending on Darren with savage force. Other guests, clearly powerful in media or business, began to frown. Perhaps they had staked entire marketing strategies on Darren's squeaky clean image. One by one, Darren felt alliances slipping away. "This wasn't how I intended," he tried to say, but the crowd muttered disapproval. A cluster of paparazzi, invited to capture the party's magnificence, now smelled blood. Camera shutters clicked incessantly. The man who had planned an extravagant demonstration of success was now reeling under the harsh spotlight of scandal. Heather locked eyes with Darren, her expression resolute. "Maybe it's time you told the truth," she said gently. For a moment, Darren looked as though he might lash out. Then the fight drained from him. The unstoppable arrogance that had carried him through every obstacle seemed to crumble under the weight of exposure. "Fine," he croaked, voice thick with defeat. I have a daughter. Her name is Rosie. I never planned for things to go this way. Maria and I," he paused, unable to weave a neat narrative that might redeem him. Cameras continued recording. Maria's tearful gaze bored into him, but she said nothing more. The moment was his to handle, or mishandle, as the case might be. Word spread like wildfire around the estate. Guests hovered at the edges, sipping champagne no longer in celebration but in shock. Darren's carefully curated life had imploded in front of hundreds of influential witnesses. Wade Roberts shook his head and turned away, likely already drafting an exit strategy from any deals that hinged on Darren's infallible reputation. Meanwhile, paparazzi swarmed Maria, demanding more details. Heather gently guided Maria to a quieter corner, shielding her from intrusive lenses. "You've been heard," she whispered. "You don't have to hide anymore." Inside the estate, Darren retreated to a secluded lounge, burying his face in his hands. The hush of the closed room contrasted starkly with the swirling commotion outside. He could hear muffled voices, some outraged, some gleefully gossiping. This was immediate karma for a man who believed he could keep certain truths locked away without consequence. A soft knock sounded. Heather entered, shutting the door behind her. "You wanted me to see your success," she said quietly. "I guess I've seen the reality instead." He lifted his head, eyes rimmed with shame. "I never meant to hurt anyone," he muttered. It was easier to keep Maria and Rosie in the shadows. Heather settled into a chair, exhaling. "You've always been ambitious, Darren. But I remember a time when you cared about more than your ego. Maybe you should start owning your life again, instead of letting your pride run the show." Tears glistened in Darren's eyes. "I can't fix this, can I?" Heather offered a small shrug. "The only way forward is honesty. Start by acknowledging your daughter. Support Maria openly. It won't salvage every deal, but it might salvage your conscience." Darren swallowed, nodding dully. He knew the path to redemption would be steep and not guaranteed. Outside, the glittering gala had dimmed into an awkward hush. Some guests left abruptly, unimpressed by the scandal. Others lingered, drawn to the swirling drama like moths to flame. Maria stood alone by the massive marble fountain, phone in hand, preparing to call a ride home. Darren emerged, shoulders slumped. Without prompt, he walked over and sank to one knee before her, ignoring the stares. "Maria," he said, voice trembling with sincerity. "I'm sorry. I know words can't fix the pain I've caused. Please, let me be part of Rosie's life, the way I should have been from the start." Cameras flashed again. Maria blinked through tears. Slowly she nodded, her guard still up, but perhaps allowing a small measure of hope. Heather watched from a few steps away, uncertain how she felt witnessing Darren's contrition. She recalled the heartbreak he'd caused her, the news he'd just caused Maria, yet a spark of compassion lingered. People could change if they confronted their worst selves. She strolled past them, leaving them space to navigate their conversation. As she stepped to the edge of the crowd, a paparazzo lunged for a quote. Heather brushed them aside. She had what she needed, a story about a millionaire's downfall, but also a glimmer of redemption, if Darren truly meant it. However, she realized that sometimes the biggest revelations weren't for headlines. They were for healing. In the aftermath of that fateful gala, social media exploded with footage of Darren's confession. The buzz overshadowed any talk of deals he had planned to announce. A few corporate partners cut ties, citing moral clauses. Stock in Darren's ventures dipped. But interestingly enough, some respected him for coming clean, albeit under pressure. Maria found her voice too. She demanded that Darren formally acknowledge Rosie, and he began the process of sharing custody and support. For the first time, Rosie's existence was no longer a shameful secret, but a cherished truth. Darren had a long road to rebuild trust and credibility, yet each small step chipped away at the fortress of vanity he'd constructed. Heather, for her part, returned to her life of investigative reporting. She wrote one op-ed about the cost of concealing truth, deliberately omitting Darren's name. Instead, she spoke broadly of the human tendency to bury mistakes for the sake of pride, and how such actions often lead to heartbreak and devastation. It gained traction, prompting discussions on moral responsibility among the powerful. After the storm settled, Heather received an unexpected call. It was Darren thanking her for forcing him to face reality. "I'm not sure how to make amends for the past," he said. "Softly, but I'm going to try." Over the next month, Darren worked to restructure his business, focusing on ethical investments and philanthropic endeavors. He publicly acknowledged his daughter, posting a heartfelt statement that no child should ever be hidden for any reason. Though many criticized him for his initial secrecy, a surprising number also offered him cautious praise for changing course. Maria, with renewed confidence, stepped out of the shadows, forging a more balanced co-parenting arrangement with Darren. Photos emerged of them, together with Rosie, at family-friendly events, no paparazzi needed. It was real this time, not staged, and it showed in their relieved smiles. True to her nature, Heather continued her investigations, traveling overseas for another expose. From time to time, she received a text from Darren updating her on Rosie's milestones, first day of school, losing her first tooth, or a silly dance recital. Heather would smile privately at these messages, gratified that a child's world had improved, even if it came at the cost of Darren's old illusions. As for Darren, each shared photo or anecdote felt like another step away from the hollow grandeur of his previous life and towards something more genuine. The pain of immediate karma still stung, but it had led him to a truth he could no longer ignore. In an unlikely twist, Darren's contrition opened new doors he'd never anticipated. A philanthropic organization he once merely donated to approached him about joining their board. They saw in him an individual who had confronted personal failings and emerged with a clearer sense of responsibility. Grateful for a second chance, Darren accepted, dedicating funds and time to causes supporting single parents, ensuring no one would face the struggles Maria had endured without resources. The irony wasn't lost on him. The man who once arranged lavish galas to flaunt wealth now hosted community fundraisers focused on transparency and genuine connection. Even as life gained a more honest equilibrium, the memory of that one gala never fully faded. People whispered about how Darren Stokes once tried to dazzle an ex-girlfriend, only to be undone by his hidden family. The story circulated in business circles, cautionary yet curiously inspiring. Heather, though reluctant to be the poster child for Darren's downfall, found closure in the outcome. She'd glimpsed the consequences of unbridled pride firsthand. She'd witnessed Maria step into her own strength, and she'd seen Darren pick up the pieces of a shattered facade, forging something more meaningful. On a breezy afternoon, nearly a year after the scandal, Darren invited Heather to a low-key charity luncheon at a local community centre. No black tie dress code, no orchestrated fanfare. He wanted to highlight the centre's reading program for underprivileged kids. Heather arrived in simple attire. Maria was there too, with Rosie proudly showing off her favourite picture book. Darren greeted them with heartfelt warmth. This time, it wasn't about showing off. It felt more like an extended family gathering, filled with sincerity rather than status. Heather noticed how Darren knelt to talk eye to eye with Rosie, how the little girl giggled freely, comfortable in her father's presence. Over a modest buffet of sandwiches and fruit punch, Darren took Heather aside. "I know I did everything wrong back then," he said, face earnest. "But I hope this is proof I'm learning." Heather nodded. She had changed since college, so had he. Neither was perfect, but they were miles from who they used to be. "You're doing the right thing now," she replied, "and that matters more than living in regret." For a moment, an unspoken acknowledgement passed between them. Perhaps redemption was possible, but it couldn't erase the past. It could only pave a more honest road forward. In the months that followed, Darren's transformation continued. Though he suffered financial setbacks from the exodus of certain business partners, other alliances formed around his newfound integrity. He rebuilt his brand not as a flashy magnate, but as a philanthropist who owned his mistakes. Media outlets that once ridiculed his scandal now ran features on his charitable partnerships. Maria felt relief, no longer forced to skulk in shadows. Rosie thrived, overjoyed by her father's consistent involvement. Heather observed from a distance. Proud yet cautious, she'd seen how quickly illusions could form and how painfully they could shatter. This time, however, Darren's actions seemed genuine. One quiet evening, Darren found himself alone in his penthouse, still luxurious, though emptier without the constant swirl of partygoers. On the fireplace mantel, he had placed a framed photo of Rosie, with Maria beaming at the charity luncheon. Nearby stood an old picture of himself and Heather from their college days, both looking hopeful and naive. He thought about how far he had come, the chasms he had crossed, the illusions he had destroyed, and the truths he had embraced. As the city lights twinkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Darren smiled to himself, feeling more at peace than he ever had in the midst of 1,000 champagne flutes. Life, he realized, was not about the perfect image or the biggest bank account. It was about the connections formed through honesty. The immediate karma that had struck him that night at the gala was brutal, but it also freed him from a prison of self-deceit. He recalled the wave of humiliation when Heather and Maria shattered his facade in front of the world. That moment had felt like an ending. Now he saw it as the beginning of a redemption arc he never knew he needed. Perhaps the million-dollar question wasn't how to expand his empire further, but how to become a father Rosie could depend on, a co-parent Maria could trust, and a friend Heather could respect. In the end, the scandal that threatened to ruin Darren pushed him to reconcile with the very parts of himself he'd long buried. Heather moved on, proud of the role she'd played in catalyzing his awakening. Maria gained the public acknowledgement and support she deserved. Rosie gained a father who showed up in ways that truly mattered. And Darren, who once invited his ex to a lavish event, just to show off, finally understood that real wealth lay not in vanity, but in the relationships nurtured through truth. A single evening of reckoning had rippled into a lifetime of change. Thank you for staying with us through this intense tale of hidden secrets and shocking revelations. We've seen how one night of confrontation can unravel a carefully crafted image, forcing the truth into the light and changing lives forever. If you enjoyed this story or found its twists thought-provoking, please give us a thumbs up and consider sharing it with friends who love stories that tug at the heart. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful narratives exploring the depths of ambition, betrayal, and redemption. Your support helps us continue bringing you real, raw tales that spark new perspectives and perhaps a little hope.